Welcome back, everyone. I'm your fearless leader, Captain Foley.
And I'm your even more fearless, I guess, also leader, definitely, Commander Kongs.
That's right, we are Team Trekyards, and we are back again for another info-packed episode on a ship that's got a lot of you screaming for us to do it since basically the first day.
Pretty much.
So, Samuel, I have a question for you. In the night sky, what do you generally see?
Orange light pollution.
Besides that?
Sometimes stars, general blackness.
Yes, stars. And those stars are sometimes in the shape of what we call...
I see where you're going with this. And I wouldn't even need to read the script to tell me. Constellations?
Yes! And when you are looking up at those stars and constellations, what are you in fact doing?
Stargazing.
Yes! Making you a stargazer. So, Samuel, any guesses on the topic of today's discussion?
Well, I'd have to assume... Wild guess here, guys. Wild guess. It was Picard's first command, the USS STARGAZER, Constellation Class, and boy, that was a very long way to announce what style of ship it is.
Well, you're wrong, because it's the Nova class that we're doing today, so... I'm just kidding. You're correct. And we will be looking at the Constellation class of ships in general, so not just specifically the Stargazer. Now, this has been a much requested episode, and as such, we have worked extra hard to make it a good one. So let's gaze up into the night sky and all become stargazers. The constellations await us. Well, the ships anyway.
Yes, well, this class of vessel is often referred to as a star cruiser class, or just cruiser if you prefer. It measures in at 310 metres long, 175 metres wide, and a height of 86 metres. There are a total of 15 decks and a standing crew of 535 personnel, as originally designed for deep space exploration and defensive border patrol duties. Now, to put that into perspective, the Enterprise refit is 305 metres, with the Miranda class at 243 metres, the Excelsior at 467 metres, making the Constellation around the same size as, in fact, the latest Steamrunner. So actually, overall, it's a medium-sized ship for the era.
However, some specific ships of this class were outfitted as heavy destroyer vessels. These vessels' mission statements were for longer-range sensor analysis within threat territories, communications, intelligence gathering, deployment and retrieval of cargo and stealth shuttles, as well as general science and patrol duties. The development of the Constellation class was overseen by Admiral Gielan.
The official in-universe reason why it was named Constellation was in memory of the original USS Constellation NCC 1017, which was the Constitution class ship that was commanded by Matt Decker and lost in the battle against the Doomsday Machine in 2267.
However, the actual real reason it was named this was because in the TNG episode The Battle, LeVar Burton and Will Wheaton both called it a Constitution class, since they were originally going to be using a refitted Constitution class vessel as the basis of that story, which of course had to be corrected later when the producers decided to change it to another class of ship after the episode was actually filmed. So it clearly couldn't be the Constitution class anymore.
Yeah, they in fact need to redub all the lines of dialogue, which included the class name, and Constellation closely matches the lip movement. So, Constellation, Constitution. I mean, if you turn the sound off right now, what am I saying? Constitution, Constellation, Constitution,
Constellation, Constitution.
Perfect.
You're saying.
Good ideas, guys. And it's a great name anyway. I mean, that's a great name for a ship, Constellation. Yeah. Just saying. Anyway.
Well, usually we don't get into those kind of behind-the-scenes details until much later in the show, but this is something we felt you guys should know right off the hop. I have a lot more to say about that later, actually, in the discussion part, but let's get back into all the in-universe facts and figures for now. The first ship of this class, USS Constellation, NX 1974, hey, that's actually the year I was born, was commissioned under experimental prototype status in the year 2275.
Which was 10 years before Wrath of Khan, just for context.
So basically around the motion picture year, kind of when Starfleet was doing their new design, refit, and development.
Yeah. Yep. But this was a scratch built, it wasn't refitted, it was built as is, sort of thing.
Well, there were COS versions of ships similar to that, so
not
who
on
knows?
The same exact. Well, who knows? But we think it's anyway.
It was based on those designs, I think. Yeah. Primary construction of the prototype Constellation took place at the San Francisco Fleet Yard's dry dock orbiting Earth. The Constellation was soon followed by the USS Sempak and the USS Speedwell, with construction beginning soon thereafter of the USS Stargazer and the USS Hathaway.
The later construction contracts were under the supervision of Yoyodyne, a propulsion system, and took place at the Copernicus shipyards on Luna. The Constellation was still undergoing some certification trials even after the completion of some of the newer ships, such as USS Hathaway, almost a decade later, and we'll get on to why later on.
Yeah, some developmental problems.
Little problems.
These ships were soon to become the mainstay of Starfleet's exploratory and defensive efforts throughout the early part of the 24th century, some commanded by the same captain for up to 20 years or even more. By the 2330s, construction of the new Constellation Class vessels was limited only to a year, as newer, more advanced starship designs, such as the Ambassador class, were coming into service.
And these old-style vessels were on the verge of being phased out from the frontline service in the 2360s, regarded as being too overworked and underpowered. Many had already been entirely decommissioned and rendered warp inactive, which included removing all the offensive systems and all the antimatter, although not removing the warp core.
Those that were still in service in the 2360s and 2370s were engaged primarily in support roles within the fleet, such as transport duties and search and rescue missions.
One of the most notable features of this design, and I think you guys all spotted it, was one of the few classes that had 4 mounted warp nacelles. This design did previously exist in the TOS years in form of the USS Nelson and the lesser-known Defender class, which at the time was a top-secret experimental design.
This new design philosophy was supposed to reduce structural integrity output by combining the engineering and other main systems all within a single space frame instead of the 2 unique hull configurations which were attached together, which always caused stresses on both the structural integrity field as well as the attachment points for larger vessels.
That's pretty interesting. I never considered why, and it's interesting to hear the scientific universe reason. The idea did eventually turn into the TOS era Constellation type design anyway, which had the same engine configuration. These were produced, however, in limited numbers and acted as a testbed for the new engine setup, as well as improved sensor suites, which is kind of nice because then the later Constellation also has improved sensors, so makes sense.
The new engine placements were meant to significantly increase speed and maneuverability across the warp flight envelope and improve the fuel efficiency at a medium cruise speed by about 15%. In retrospect, it was found that this new design ideology proved that the designers tried to do too much in just one step, a problem not helped by the usually rushed design process, which virtually guaranteed that faults would be experienced while in service.
Yeah.
Severe problems were encountered with the development of this new warp core configuration, and several vessels experienced a variety of failures with this new system.
The most notable was an early prototype having to reject its warp core on 3 separate occasions during the testing phase, which is a bit of a problem. After a great deal of time and effort, however, working on this problem, it was decided that the warp cores, which were expected to power these 4 dedicated nacelles and engines, were simply not up to the task to produce anywhere near the power required. Alterations to the warp cores were developed which increased this power output. However, that became a dangerous level of power in most cases, hence the warp core rejections. So an output limiter and limiter software was added to the mix to restrict the output of the reactor to these nacelles to, make it safe.
Yes. Unfortunately, while this corrected several issues and put a stop to emergency warp core ejections, it did not solve the problem, as now the design was robbed of some of its most important advances. They were now seriously underpowered for their size, and the configuration made them lumbering brutes when it came to maneuverability. Both were factors which adversely affected almost every aspect of their operation.
And you can imagine the testing phase with this amazing new system. It works great. Damn, we have some major problems. Okay, let's just bring it back.
It would work great. It was designed great.
And now it doesn't work, and now it's underpowered. That must have been like the guy initially said, "Let's do this design." Was like, well, that was a failure. Like, terrible. Although I gotta say, when we said eject the warp cores, do you think they then exploded? Because that's a serious to lose 3 complete warp cores, or they just have to maybe the vacuum of space cooled them down enough to stop the reaction. I mean,
perhaps 1 or 2 of them exploded. 1 was retrieved. I don't know. It didn't really say. So. Use your imagination.
If they full on exploded, though, that's a serious loss of tech each time. Anyway, despite this, Starfleet was committed to the production of these ships on a larger scale, so things went ahead as scheduled, and this led to other TOS ships consisting of 4 warp nacelles, like the Langley class and the more widely known and very popular Mars class battleship. Over the years, many attempts were made to rectify these serious problems with these space frame designs, and eventually some success were achieved, especially with the newer Mars class battleship, due to a new design profile which allowed greater structural strength and to reroute any of this extra power that could become dangerous into other systems.
Newer upgraded warp core designs were eventually manufactured and installed in many of the ships bearing this configuration that brought them back to their intended power output. Still others in the fleet received new control software, which allowed their power output to be safely boosted by about 15% or more in some cases. Refits to older style ships were not seen as an efficient use of resources, however, so redesigns were made, and the newer, more advanced Constellation Class was born around the motion picture time period, with Starfleet's new tech and design ideology. It's kind of taking its next steps into the next design philosophy for Starfleet. So,
I mean, especially the warp engines are a wholly different design almost, so it makes sense. Although it's kind of funny, you mentioned they finally were able to be fixed, as it were. I'm sure the designer, as soon as that first warp core exploded, he was like, "Yeah, I'm going back to the computer console. He's going to work every day until he fixes his baby's problem." Although he's like drawing board, design the Constellation. So anyway, the primary advantage of this design was that the extra nacelles made these vessels very well suited for long-term deep space exploration, as this allowed the vessel to swap between active warp nacelles and reduce wear and tear, which greatly extended operational usefulness and made overhauls much less necessary. And I've got to ask, so does this mean that all 4 nacelles were on, or only 2 were on? Because
I imagine that they probably used all 4 with reduced power, like half power, so that it could extend the life of the engines. Or they could also swap out between 2 active nacelles and 2 that are completely shut down, which would also extend the life of each one. So they could probably swap out the pairs or just run them at reduced power, all 4 of them, I would imagine.
Because we know that.
But you got that extra push if you need for the 4 nacelles to increase the power for all 4.
Well, that's the emergency warp speed, isn't it? That they always talk about. But you've got to consider, you don't. It's not about how many engines equals the amount of speed. And pumping more power in doesn't necessarily add to that. It's just maybe the stability of the warp bubble. So things like Prometheus, the reason it has 4 nacelles is that when it splits, each part can be at warp. And obviously when it's combined, having all 4 at full power can go warp point 9.9, whatever. But I'm sure it can still reach its fullish potential and have all 4 on. So like I said, it's probably a redundancy system and you can swap around. Maybe, we don't know. But it's interesting.
Yeah, but it's a great use of resources to have 4 nacelles you can swap between and just increase the length of their overhaul time, right?
But you can imagine in like say a Klingon Katinga's, is chasing you and you've only got 2 on, and then the captain's like, "Commander, activate the 4 nacelles," and they're just suddenly, you see those great car chases which suddenly pulls away. It's like, oh, now we're being severely severely outrunning them. So be funny.
So this unique arrangement proved so successful that it was incorporated in other Starship designs in the future and carried over to some of the Nebula class variants, as well as the Cheyenne class and the later Prometheus class, as you just mentioned.
Yep.
The Constellation class vessels had a top speed of around warp 9 for probably about 14 hours.
That's pretty good. These starships also had 2 impulse reactors. The dual impulse drive units were placed in a vertical configuration in line with the saucer on either side of the secondary hull, not altering the top sublight speed of this class. These redundant units, however, when used in concert with each other, gave the ship a huge advantage in acceleration and maneuverability. During the original construction contract, the Constellation class ships employed an Avendine impulse engine, but by the latter half of the 24th century, these had been replaced by more efficient, newer impulse engines.
The Constellation class carried standard Starfleet weaponry, including phasers and photon torpedoes. This consisted of 6 dual-emitter phaser banks and 4 forward-facing torpedo launchers. Now, personally, I think Starfleet needs to start investing in rear-facing photon torpedo launchers, as they can come in quite handy in a fight. As anyone who has played Star Trek Legacy or Bridge Commander knows all too well. That being said, however, it was capable of firing 8 photon torpedoes in a single spread, 2 from each torpedo tube. This is very similar to what we see at the end of Star Trek II, when the Enterprise fires 2 torpedoes from the one tube in the final stages of her battle with the Reliant. The ship was also protected by very powerful defensive shielding.
I think it's worth saying at this point, this was designed at the same time as the Constitution class refit, and they had no aft torpedoes, whereas the Excelsior, I believe, did. So it's probably still in that design thought process. But I'm sure, in later versions, TNG era ones, they probably put some sort of aft torpedoes. I mean, it would only make sense.
Well, the Miranda class, Reliant, had an aft torpedo launcher.
Well, they have a dedicated roll bar. Although, in essence, this does too.
Exactly.
Again, I think that was a problem they could solve quite quickly in the next refit. Because Federation loves to refit stuff. Anyway, she's also equipped with a large shuttle bay located at the front of the saucer. The standard shuttle complement changes depending on the ship's current mission profile and era, but a complement of work bees and a number of standard shuttles were always on board. There are numerous other shuttle bays around the perimeter of the saucer section, however, 6 in addition to the forward shuttle bay. So that's a staggering 7 shuttle bays in total, which is pretty interesting.
It was difficult to get deck plans for this ship because I did look for them, but we assume that many of these bays were in fact probably joined together, making the large part of the outer ring of the saucer probably shuttle bay areas that would have been attached perhaps. And this large number of bays could also be used for cargo storage, evacuation protocols, or any number of different mission profiles. So very useful and versatile ship.
And we know the D in some versions is meant to have a ring of shuttles, and so does some of the fan design ships. So maybe this is the first one that employed that. Maybe. As mentioned earlier, they were often used for retrieving spy or stealth shuttles returning from secret ops missions. The reason these ships were deployed for this kind of clandestine mission was due in large part to the ship's pretty damn impressive long-range sensors.
There were a few large sensor domes and many fairings that marred the otherwise clean lines on the underside of the saucer. These sensor pallets contained special long-range sensor equipment that befitted her role as a deep space explorer. Most of these could be exchanged for mission-specific equipment at a starbase and could be accessed from the deck above to perform any repairs or enhancements that were required.
Cool. The Constellation Class's bridge were rather small and Spartan, and in fact end up having many variations and changes through the changes in the space frame's lifespan. You can imagine just the Enterprise A Constitution Class, they have a new one every movie. So imagine this also had a larger variety. Exactly. Some of these, such as the USS STARGAZER, had a standard Starfleet configuration with the captain's chair in the centre and both the helm and navigation console immediately in front of the captain. All the duty stations along the perimeter of the bridge were clearly marked and named with large white lettering, indicating exactly what each station was. Crewmen manning these consoles were not provided with chairs and were required to stand.
Well, that hardly seems fair or productive, really. I mean, imagine a 12-hour shift, or actually even an 8-hour shift, just doing that. I mean, come on, Starfleet, invest in more chairs. Although that being said, perhaps, well, they don't have to be manned all the time, I guess, unless you're in a battle. And how long is a battle going to last? Like, half an hour at most. So yeah. I
mean, it's not always the joke, in any show, and they say, right, set a course for Cygnus 5, engage warp. Okay, within 12 hours. Everyone's like, engage. Okay, let's go have a tea break. Like, they go off and do other things, don't they? Because travel time is actually quite a long time. But I mean, the Enterprise Z we see has standing stations, and come on, Worf had to stand for 7 years on the D bridge, although they did get a chair in Generations. But I mean, they do stand, so not fun though, I suppose.
Interesting.
Anyway, there seems to have also been major bridge redesigns and upgrades implemented in some ships, like the USS Hathaway, as it had an updated look with seating and newer style helm and navigation type consoles.
The USS STARGAZER, NCC 2893, under the command of Jean-Luc Picard, was in fact the first starship to ever perform the now famous Picard Maneuver. Picard Maneuver. This technique is now required reading at the Academy for any new cadets, as I'm sure you all know as being my crew. It was in the Zeta Maxia star system in the year 2355 that the Stargazer was attacked by an unknown craft.
The Stargazer was heavily damaged after a sneak attack and seemed to be at their mercy with an unidentified alien attacker. However, scans soon indicated the alien craft did not have faster-than-light sensors, so Picard ordered a high-speed warp burst directly towards the unknown ship, and considering that the vessels were roughly 9 million kilometers apart at the time, and light travels at about 300,000 kilometers a second, it took light from Stargazer around 30 seconds to reach the opposing ship.
Math. The teacher said you'd never use it. You need it.
Science.
This meant that the Stargazer would appear to the enemy to be in two places at the same time, causing confusion to both their visual and sensor readings. During this confusion, the captain of the enemy ship ordered that they fire upon the Stargazer's original position, but the ship was, of course, no longer there. Picard, on the other hand, immediately opened fire at nearly point-blank range and destroyed the enemy vessel. The encounter, however, resulted in the Stargazer being so heavily damaged that Picard had to order all hands to abandon ship. And it was not discovered until 9 years later that the ship they had destroyed was in fact a Ferengi ship.
So that is it for this week's Trekyards, guys. Hope you loved it.
Tune in again for the continuation. Keep your eyes peeled, because it's coming.
Ooh, looking forward to it.
Me too.
Me too.
Bye, everybody.